There is a sign at the entrance to Badwater Basin that reads, in the same flat government lettering as every other warning in Death Valley National Park, that the salt flat ahead is the lowest point in North America, that ground temperatures here can exceed 200 degrees, and that leaving the boardwalk in summer is not recommended under any circumstances. Victoria Pruitt-Lang read that sign, photographed it for her Instagram story with the caption, "When the desert tries to gatekeep the aesthetic," and walked past it anyway. This is the story of the 40 minutes that followed, and the man who is still paying for trying to bring her back. Victoria was 38, a luxury real estate agent in Scottsdale, with 190,000 followers, built almost entirely on drone shots of infinity pools and captions about manifesting abundance. She had booked a private golden hour content shoot at Badwater Basin for July 19th, the exact kind of date a competent outfitter should have refused outright, and had specifically requested a location far enough out that you can't see the tourists in the frame. Her photographer and guide for the day was Diego Ferran, 39, a long-time Death Valley concessions photographer who had spent 11 summers walking this basin and had personally assisted in 2 heat rescues the year before. Diego met her at the trailhead at 4 p.m., already uneasy, because 4 p.m. in Death Valley in July is not golden hour. It's the tail end of the deadliest window of the day, with ground temperatures on the salt flat still well over 150 degrees. He told her they needed to wait until closer to 7. Victoria checked her phone, told him her flight back to Scottsdale was at 9 the next morning, and her schedule didn't have a 7 p.m. slot, and asked if he was going to do his job, or if she needed to find someone who would. Diego explained as calmly as he could that the National Park Service explicitly discourages hiking on the salt flat in daylight hours during summer, that there was no shade anywhere on the basin floor, and that heat illness at this hour could become life-threatening within 30 minutes of real exertion. Victoria told him she did hot yoga 4 times a week, and that some influencer intern in an air-conditioned booth didn't get to decide what her body could handle. They started out onto the flat at 4:20. For the first quarter mile, along the boardwalk section most visitors never leave, it went the way it always does, manageable, even pleasant in the strange alien beauty of the white salt polygons stretching to the mountains. Victoria stopped every few dozen feet for a new setup, unbothered, energized even, telling Diego the light was insane and that this was already blowing up her last post. Diego kept glancing at his watch and at her face, watching for the first signs he'd been trained to catch. At the end of the boardwalk, a second, smaller sign marked where the maintained path stopped and the open salt began. Victoria wanted to keep going. Diego told her flatly that beyond this point, they'd be walking on ground that regularly registered over 180 degrees in direct sun, hot enough to blister skin through the soles of ordinary shoes, and that every additional minute out there multiplied the risk. Victoria pulled off her sandals, looked at him and said, "Then I guess we'll both just have to be professionals about it," and stepped past the sign barefoot, because she'd decided the shot needed her looking elementally connected to the landscape. Diego followed her, both because it was his job and because leaving a client alone a half-mile out on an open salt flat in July wasn't something he was willing to do. Within 10 minutes, Victoria's feet were burned badly enough that she was wincing between shots, though she refused to put her sandals back on, telling Diego it would ruin the continuity. He begged her to turn back. She told him she hadn't flown out here to get a coward's version of the photo, and that if he wasn't willing to walk another 200 yards for the shot she was paying $5,000 for, she'd leave a review that ended his season. That's when the real damage started, though neither of them could see it happening the way Diego, with his experience, should have been able to. Victoria had been drinking iced coffee since the airport and exactly 1 bottle of water since arriving at the park, nowhere near enough to keep pace with what the heat was pulling out of her. Around the half-mile mark, she stopped mid-sentence, swayed, and told Diego she felt weirdly floaty, a phrase she said like it was funny. He recognized it instantly as the specific, terrifying calm that comes right before a body stops being able to cool itself at all. a condition called exertional heat stroke, in which the core temperature climbs past 104 degrees, and the brain itself begins to lose the ability to recognize the danger it's in. He tried to get her walking back toward the boardwalk immediately. She refused, annoyed, insisting she just needed literally one more setup, and that he was being dramatic. 2 minutes later, she stopped sweating entirely, her skin going hot and dry under a sun that hadn't lost any of its intensity, and her words started arriving a half-beat behind her thoughts, sentences that began confidently and dissolved into nothing partway through. Diego stopped arguing and started acting. He got an arm under her and began half-carrying, half-dragging her back toward the boardwalk, easily 180 pounds of a client who could no longer reliably move her own legs, across half a mile of salt that was, by then, radiating heat up through his own boots with every step. He gave her the last of his water. He wrapped his own shirt around her head. He called for help on a radio that returned nothing but static that deep in the basin, and he kept moving, because stopping was the one thing he knew for certain would kill her. He got her within sight of the parking area before his own legs gave out beneath him, his muscles cramping into knots so severe he later learned in a Las Vegas ICU that the prolonged exertion in that heat had broken down muscle tissue throughout his body and flooded his kidneys with the byproducts. A condition called rhabdomyolysis, serious enough that doctors kept him on dialysis for 4 days to keep his kidneys from failing outright. He collapsed roughly 200 yards from the trailhead, still holding on to Victoria, both of them finally spotted by a family walking back from the overlook at dusk. Paramedics reached them within 20 minutes, fast by Death Valley standards, and it still wasn't fast enough. Victoria Pruitt-Lang was pronounced dead at Desert View Hospital that night of heat stroke and cardiac arrest. Her core body temperature, according to the report, having climbed past 107 degrees before Diego ever got her back to the boardwalk. Diego survived, but spent 9 days in the hospital, and doctors told him afterward that the damage to his kidneys, combined with the accumulated joint strain from carrying her weight across half a mile of uneven salt, meant he would likely never be medically cleared to guide strenuous desert hikes again. The outfitter Diego worked for quietly pulled all after 3 p.m. summer bookings from its calendar within the month, a policy change that arrived roughly 1 lawsuit and 1 obituary too late for anyone to call it proactive. Victoria's final post, scheduled to publish automatically the next morning through an app that didn't know she was gone, went out anyway. A photograph of her silhouette against the white salt flat, captioned, "Found myself in the middle of nowhere," and it stayed up, gathering likes and comments from followers who had no idea for almost 6 hours before anyone at the company noticed and took it down. Diego Ferran doesn't guide anymore. He still lives near the park, and people who know him say he can't drive past the Badwater Basin turnoff without looking away from the sign at the entrance, the one that says, in the same flat lettering it's always used, that the ground ahead can reach 200 degrees, and that the desert does not make exceptions for anyone's schedule. If you've ever seen someone push a guide, a ranger, or a warning sign past the point they should have, tell me about it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, this is the channel where I keep digging them up.